sit there or there?
You sit there, Michael, and Barbara can sit here.
Okay.
She's just more photogenic, that's all. Oh, all right. And thank you both for coming out. These are my dear, dear friends, Michael and Barbara Shacker. And we've known each other for years. And Barbara, why don't you start with would you consider starting with the story of how you developed stroke family and the sensory trigger? Tell a little bit about your father and what happened with that, just to take us back in the history that's there in the book. You can also read about this in that very excellent book, The Neurofeedback Solution.
Well, I was prepared for my husband's, massive traumatic brain injury in a very unusual way. When I was 13, my father had a stroke that came out of the blue, and he was diagnosed with global aphasia. And if you look into the literature about global aphasia, the Encyclopedia Britannica says that is incurable, and that someone with this massive type of aphasia will never talk again. And so instead of
You were how
believing
old?
that, I was 13.
You were 13.
And but my mother wanted him to have speech therapy anyway, so we did 2 years of speech therapy. We went to the University of Nebraska and did it in their, in their department, the speech and language department there. And it was quite a long time for them. He did regain about 9 words. So he had 9 words that he could say. And I was going through a hard time with this because I was very close to my father, and for some reason I could not accept that he was not going to talk again. And my mother kept telling me, "Oh, Barbara, you're going to have to accept this because this is just the truth. This is reality." And I said, I don't know what it is, but I just feel like there's something I can do to help him talk again. And I don't know what it is, but I can't accept that. So I never did quite accept that, diagnosis.
Vernon.
His name was Vernon, yeah.
Vernon, you did a beautiful job in the Reader's Digest interview of talking about how, as a girl, you adored your father. He was warm, he was capable, he was genial, he was involved with the family. And to see him brought low was...
It's devastating, and a stroke, a massive traumatic brain injury, is devastating to families, but it's particularly hard, I think, on children and teenagers. So it was, I grew up in this situation, and but then when I was working in a library, one day I had a eureka sort of experience where I remembered that my father had taken his left hand and drawn this very elaborate diagram of the car engine when there was something wrong with the car, and he knew what it was, but he could not say what it was. And he pointed to the part that was broken and said, yeah. And so I said, "Well, Dad, is that the part that's going to be fixed by the mechanic?" And he said, yeah. So I took this drawing to the mechanic to make sure that was, true. And the mechanic said, "Yep, that's what it was. That's exactly right." So
He couldn't get the women to believe him.
right, yeah. So I was so impressed with that, and other people in my family were impressed that he could do that. He had all of his memories. He just couldn't talk. He was locked in. And no one really understood what the meaning of that was until that moment when I said, "Aha, I bet I'm an artist. I can make a picture language for him.
Yeah.
And I can get him drawing with his left hand
Brilliant.
to write, to draw little pictures of things, to communicate. So that's how we got started. And he started to draw things. If he wanted bacon and eggs for breakfast, he'd draw the eggs and bacon. Or if he wanted cereal, he drew the cereal box. And we started...
How do you draw bacon and eggs? I guess you...
Yeah, they're like little cartoon drawings. And we would write the words under it. And then as we started to do this, and he kept drawing and using his left hand to draw, I had him start to trace. And he loved old cars, so he started doing art and starting with tracing, like Model Ts and pictures of different things. Well, as this was going along, I started thinking, this is really interesting. There's something more to this, and so I started doing research. I was a librarian, and I started doing research in the library, and I had access to a lot of research at the time that most people weren't reading or paying attention to, and so I had come across this article by Michael Gazzaniga, who is considered the father of neuro-linguistic psychology.
Crickets in my pocket.
And in this article, it was about the split brain operations that they were doing in 1972. I was about 22 then. And they mentioned that in this brain specialization that happens, that we talk with both sides of our brain as young children, and then around the age of 7 to 12, the brain starts to specialize. And once it's specialized, then you've got a dominant active speech center, and then you have a passive speech center. And the dominant speech center is connected with your dominant hand. So I thought, okay. So if that's true, why not make this hand the new dominant hand? So I really did everything to get my father to use his left hand, but connect it with speech at the same time. So he progressed to the level of being able to repeat these words that he was drawing and tracing and printing. And he stayed in that stage for a long time. And then in about 18 months, he said his first spontaneous word. And he was watching the television at the Mars Explorer news report, and he drew the solar system. He wrote the word Mars next to it, and then he said, Mars. That was his first spontaneous word. And so we knew that we had made a breakthrough there, and we continued really working with this, and within the rest of about 2 years, he started to gain words back every day. It was mainly a single word language, but eventually he gained a vocabulary of over 750 words, and it was enough that he could go on the bus by himself. He could go to the bank, he could go to the post office, and he could get around. He was very good at pretending just to be a shy, quiet person. Some people didn't really know, who didn't know him, didn't get the impression that he had a speech problem.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
I should mention that Barbara's resourcefulness as just a family member who loved, this is how many people have found their way to neurofeedback, is that they have a family member they want to help. Mm-hmm. And she had to start from the whole cloth, so to speak, and invent her own method, which is called the sensory trigger. And she was proposed for an award by Johns Hopkins, is that?
I received an award.
You received an award.
From Johns Hopkins in the 90s because I created the first talking software for aphasia. And I had this tested at UC Davis Medical Center with stroke patients who had plateaued and weren't progressing with speech therapy, and 100% of them got better. They didn't, not necessarily did they recover completely, but they improved, which is unheard of. So. And
the Nobel Prize winner Roger Sperry and his associate Michael Gazzaniga, who was one of the people who figured out the split brain kind of dynamics and all that kind of thing, said, how could it be? How could this woman do what whole colleges full of graduate students can't accomplish. and research labs and funding and lots of money. How could it be that she could do this?
Yeah.
And the answer is love.
Love.
And
And paying attention.
And paying attention
Paying
helps.
attention. Let them show you what's going on in their mind and what they need, and just respond to that. So in the moment, I think it's very powerful. Instead of going into maybe a therapy session, with very predetermined exercises and things, lots of people can get to the point where they do okay in therapy, but they can't transfer those skills outside of it. So with this, the family members, which it turns out anyone who recovers speech after a stroke or head injury does so with the help of family, and they know this now. It's an essential piece that has to be there, and of course the family is who they want to communicate with the most, is your family. So if you do this in the moment, and what you're doing is you're constantly stimulating this left hand, and it's as simple as holding their hand while you're talking to them. And when Michael was just coming out of his coma and was not responding, I was able to get responses out of him by holding his left hand.
And the first word that Barbara got him to say was read. And so
Read.
when I first started visiting Michael in the, and we'll go back to the beginning of that story in just a little bit, but first started visiting Michael in the Northeast Center for Special Care, which is a really wonderful place for people with head injuries, all Michael could say was read. And he could say read, read, read. And then he got enthusiastic about another topic and he would go, Obama. Obama. And then the first two words after read and Obama, I think that he said were, he didn't say doggy and he didn't say cat. He said sentient beings. And what was the other one?
The other one, there were several, but one was
Amazing.
amazing, and one was regeneration. That was a little bit later on, but it was,
I think
it
he
was,
said metaphysics too.
Oh, metaphysics.
That was
Yes,
one of them.
metaphysics was another one.
Metaphysics.
So this is a very brilliant man here, and all of this is still in his head. He, published his book "Spring Without Bees" just before he had his traumatic brain injury, and and now Stephen and I have helped him get a publisher, and his second book is going to be published in January.
Well,
So he's come this long way, but along this path here, we were able to take him out of the center to come here for lens neurofeedback therapy, and it was a turning point for him because Michael couldn't get out of his wheelchair. And after, how long was that? Just a few short months, Michael was walking into the center here for treatment with a
No
cane.
problem.
With a cane, and no problem. And going up the steps here and coming down and sitting in the chair instead of in his wheelchair. And it was just
pretty
extraordinary.
amazing. And you just saw a miracle in front of your eyes that Michael couldn't have done a year ago, which was as Barbara began to talk about, I don't know whether anybody noticed this, Barbara began to talk about her father, he said Vernon. Now, the reason that this is a miracle is he had to move that, the phonemes from long-term memory to short-term memory and then put them into the speech centers and then say them spontaneously. For a while he could only repeat what was being said back to him. Now he really, autochthonically, if you will, says the words that he's thinking about or that are appropriate to the situation, and that's...
They say that there are 6 different processes from the moment that you want to say a word. There's 6 different things that occur in your brain to actually be able to get it out. And many times you get right to that last step and you can't make the last step. So he's gone through
It's called a
lot
senior
of...
moment.
Yeah.
and tell about you.
Oh, about
Tell
me?
about you, what you did with Michael.
Oh, well, let's go back. Thank you, Michael. Let's go back to, the story is dramatic enough. Michael was working on this book called A Spring Without Bees, night and day, because he was one of these visionaries and ecologists who was really moved by what's happening in the modern world, which is that the chemical companies and the pharmaceutical companies and big corporations everywhere are seizing the day, and they are destroying the environment that we all live in. And he was looking at colony collapse disorder among the bees. And he was working really almost like around the clock and getting exhausting himself. He's always been a person with a strong constitution, versatile, a true Renaissance man. Somebody says, you know a Renaissance man? I go, yeah, it's him. And he's the author of books. He is good with technology, especially appropriate technology, solar. He's designed solar systems, solar energy systems. He has written his own music. He has written a wonderful musical on the life of William Blake. He's a real, genuine scholar. So he was moved. He couldn't stop writing The Spring Without Bees because it has to do with a large corporation that is manufacturing a very toxic neurotoxin called imidacloprid. Imidacloprid, okay. And it is spread on suburban lawns everywhere, and it is doing in the bees. And just a few parts per billion destroys their waggle dance. And a waggle dance is if you're not a bee, you don't think waggle dances are so important. I think they're just for rappers and, people who have taken too much ecstasy or something like that. But a waggle dance is the way that the bees know how to get back to their hive.
It's their communication.
And it was impairing that.
Waggle.
Yeah. So it's like giving the bees a stroke.
Yeah.
In their dominant communication center. The bees are incredibly important because the European honeybee is the most effective pollinator. And there are wild pollinators that are being affected by this as well. But the honeybee has evolved over millions of years, and without that efficient pollination, we'll lose 70% of what we eat. Basically, and that includes dairy and meat, because this is what we feed them. It's the food chain. And
it's apricots, it's avocado.
It's everything. It's
yeah.
everything except for grains and poultry and fish. You'd have fish, poultry, grains, and water.
Yeah.
Everything else
So
would
anyway,
be gone.
Barbara, why don't you, if you don't mind, talking about the premonitions you had that something bad was going to happen. And then how she responded she was really on her toes. I mean, talk about heroes. Again, the loved ones of the people who are going through a crisis are the real heroes of our story. So Barbara began to have hunches. She had a stroke in her family. She was the author of this stroke family system, the sensory trigger, in touch with people all over the country who are having strokes. And she began to have uncomfortable dreams. And
yeah, I had kind of a series of nightmares, but the one that was very clear became just 3 nights before this happened. And the dream was that I had gone away to do something and came back home, and Michael was laying dead on the floor with a hole through his heart, or near his heart, in his chest, in a pool of blood. And
that's called a nightmare.
Yeah, and
2 places.
And so when he was very tired, he was very tired too. He was getting and we thought, well, he's working so hard on this book, and so we didn't think about this so much. But then I was watching him walk out to the car one day, and he was listing kind of to one side, and it looked like one of his legs was moving a little bit slower than the other. And I thought, there's something seriously wrong. And we had asked Michael to go to the doctor. I don't know if the doctor would have found this though. And Melissa also sensed it. And but after this,
Their daughter.
yeah. But after this nightmare that I had, when he said, "I got a pain in my back, and I'm going to go lay down," for some reason I went with him when he went upstairs to lay down, and I have a computer up there, so I was at my computer working, and he says, "You know, Barbara, this is getting worse, and it doesn't feel like a normal back pain." And I said, "What does it feel like?" And he said, "It feels like someone stabbing me in the back, like a knife going through my back." And when he said that, I flashed on, because I asked him where it was, and it was exactly in this place that this, the hole in the heart was. So, in the dream. So I flashed on that, and for some reason I knew that's what was happening. I knew, and so I said, "Well, Michael, do you have any tingling in your fingers, in your right hand?" And he says, "Yeah, now that you mention it, a little bit. My hand feels a little funny." And I says, "Well, do you have shoulder pain?" And he said, "Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, the pain is starting to go up into my shoulder." And then he suddenly said, "Oh," and he tried to get out of bed. He couldn't get out of bed. And so I said, "You're going to emergency right now." And he didn't really realize what was happening to
You
him.
Googled him, didn't you? You
Yeah.
Googled the symptoms?
I did go. Well, what I did was I Googled to find out if the local hospitals were stroke ready. There's a certain protocol for when you bring somebody in with a stroke or head injury, and they're called certified stroke centers. And so I had learned that Benedictine was one, and I called their ER and said, "We're bringing in someone with a heart attack, possible stroke," and they said "Don't bring him here because we're over capacity. You'll have to go to the other hospital."
Music to your ears.
Yeah. So I told Melissa to call the other hospital and that we were just going to go. And it turned out that Kingston Hospital also was stroke ready. Knowing what hospital to go to is also very critical in this kind of situation. You want to get to a hospital that has staff that have been trained in how to evaluate a stroke or head injury and what to do. But by the time we got there, and I just put him, I knew I didn't have time to call the ambulance. I put him in the car and I drove 70 miles an hour to Kingston. It was uncanny. There was no one on the road. There was no pedestrians. There was absolutely no one in my lane. And went through, and there were no red lights. And I got there in 17 minutes, which is pretty fast from Willow. So
Boy, I'll say.
it was hair raising, but we got there, got him in there, and they airlifted him to Albany directly into a 7-hour operation. And what it was is a torn aorta, and which is 100% fatal without an operation. Most people die before they get into the operation.
So here's Sophie's choice, do we do an operation? And the likelihood is that he's going to have a
Very
stroke.
high risk for stroke in the operation, yeah. So this is what he came out with. He's alive, but very badly damaged, and the CAT scan was just an enormous black area in his left hemisphere. The amount of damage there, I would estimate, was about 20 times needed to wipe out all speech. It was
Talking.
yeah. And
Yep.
but luckily his wife knows that the right hemisphere can learn to talk again, and so this is what we've been doing the whole
Larsen.
time.
Yeah, well,
And it fits right in with a lens. Yeah.
When I first started visiting Michael at the Northeast Center for Special Care, he had to wear a very gaudy purple football helmet because half of his brain was open, about the size of the palm of your hand was open, and the brain was like throbbing gently just under there. There was no skull.
Yeah.
And
His
No
brain
skull.
swelled. His brain swelled so much
no
they
skull.
had to.
The skull was in the hospital's
remove it.
refrigerator. Fortunately, not being taken for a ham sandwich or a coconut or something that somebody put in there, and it was being preserved. And so Victor Zelik, who's a neuropsychologist there, we talked about it and whether we could do a QEEG on Michael, and one indeed was accomplished. And in the QEEG, you can see this big, huge section of the brain that's missing. So then when Michael Barber first started being able to bring him here, he arrived in a wheelchair, and we had to use a wheelchair ramp to get him up and get him in here. And then I asked Michael an astonishing thing. I've never done this before, but I said, could we treat your brain directly on the brain with the neurofeedback? Could we put an electrode on the scalp where there's no skull? Normally, the millionths of a volt that feed our EEGs come from the brain, but they have to go through the pia mater, the dura mater, the skull, the scalp, the hair, the skin, all that kind of stuff to make it to the surface. And here is the first time I ever attached an electrode. Michael was very courageous. He said, "Do it." That's the kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
And so
Let's do it.
I did. I attached, and I could just feel the soft brain kind of pulsing under there. And but he really made enough progress so that the brain had really calmed down now, and you could see it on the lens pictures. And so at the hospital, they said, "Hey, you want your skull back?" "Okay." "Where is it?" "It's in the refrigerator." "Okay." We'll get that thing. And when they put it back in, it was a little Frankenstein monster-like, right?
Yeah. Well, it's traumatic also to
It's traumatic to put it back in.
and it was so there's a little bit of a regression there.
After a year and a half, yeah.
Yeah. But he came through that just fine.
And
Michael, no. Brad.
Well, we can talk about it that sort of at the end of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a new therapy that we're also
oh,
combining.
yes, they're doing a kind of a. Is that the Jason? Is it Holt or the
It is
acupuncture?
No, it's Chinese intensive scalp acupuncture.
Yeah.
And,
brain.
Yep, and with some trigger points that are on the right side of the body too, but it's really bringing back a lot of movement and there's more of this type of. It's a combination of therapies combined with acupuncture, but.
We made a Ramachandran box. I had met Villanayur Ramachandran, the great neurologist out in California, and he for $50 he made something called a Ramachandran box, which is used for phantom limb pain. And Michael has one of. We made one of those for Michael, and he was began to use that. And you use your good hand pretending it's your non-functional hand, and so it restores function in that way. So.
That had started.
It was amazing to
yeah.
see Michael, and I do have some videos of you performing at Beltane.
Oh.
So and they're not too terrible, but to see Michael on stage, walking on stage without a cane, not in a wheelchair, and singing. This is a man who would never walk or talk again.
1, 2, 3. Through the play.
Oh, 3 songs.
Yeah.
He sang 3 songs with his own soundtrack, and pretty amazing. And I think right now the sky is the limit because the brain, which is a holographic organ, gets it. The brain is now learning with Michael to put itself together again, and pretty soon I think it will piece everything together.
The pieces are coming together more rapidly now as it builds up. I think that holistic approach is the thing that works the best. You do everything you can to get these new pathways and new growth in the brain. Again, the brain, if you do that, the brain does respond. I think one thing that Lens also did for Michael was that when Michael first started here with Stephen, he was a bit hard to control outside of the rehab. And if you don't mind, I have to say that he's, you know, when you have a brain injury, your responses your normal kind of responses and your judgment are, you know, impaired. And so, for instance, sometimes I would get him out of the rehab and I couldn't get him back in without like the help of 6 or 7 people to convince him to go back to the rehab, you know, because he's a big, strong guy, and if he decides he doesn't want to go, it was like, and you know, who can blame him? But so that's like it's kind of a judgment and control issue. But I talked with Stephen about this type of symptom, and remembered that you had said he's going to get over that.
Yeah.
And he's going to recover that. So there's this whole other aspect that has been recovered as well. It's his whole personality and his ability to think about the future and plan and
The executive functions and the frontal
yeah.
lobes.
So
came
there's a
back
lot more that's come back, you know.
Hey, go outside, you know, out there, sell it, and a Barbara, and a, so much to see.
So much to see. Barbara, by the way, would you share just a little bit? Barbara decided to get some lens treatments herself.
Oh, yeah.
And neurofeedback treatments. We also did neurofield. And it was just, when you're going through a crisis like this with somebody you really love.
Well, I don't know what I would have done without the lens treatment and the neurofield treatments, because I was so depressed, and I had immediately gone into a very intense post-traumatic stress syndrome. And meanwhile, you know, you have to be totally on top of your game. I had to be super functional, because I was you know, providing for 2 people, and then of course when you've got one spouse that is taken out, you know, our whole lives fell apart. We lost our house and our land. His companies quickly collapsed. The companies he was running collapsed without him, you know, and you've got a daughter who's severely affected as well, and had to not finish her college years, but took 2 years off, you know, so there was, for me, I would have had to go on antidepressants, I think, and that's not what I wanted to do. So I think the lens and the neurofeedback and the neurotreatments here allowed me to recover and be functional without any chemical help.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think you would be as stunningly articulate as you are now if you had taken Prozac, quite frankly.
I can agree with that.
Then bees.
Oh yeah, there's a Spring Without Bees, and we have that book here, which we will get
No.
Oh,
we brought a copy. You
Yeah.
want to show it? You want to show your book?
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Do you know where it is, Robin?
Yeah.
Sorry, outside.
And there is not only a Spring Without Bees, and you could hold that in front of the camera if you wish for just a moment. And there is the new book called
Global Awakening.
Global Awakening, no longer 21st century transformation.
Global Awakening.
Pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Global Awakening, it's a 300-page book, and it is talking about how there is an organic revolution going on against the mechanistic and deterministic worldview of modern science, and it is absolutely right on. Robin, do you want to just hold that in front of the... Oh, well, here we are. Okay, that's good. Toby can zero in on it. A Spring Without Bees, and wait till you see Global Awakening. It's we're doing it with Inner Traditions, and they were happy to have the book. They're looking for visionary, kind of world-transforming.
Michael Shacker.
C'est moi. All right.
Sell it.
So, oh yeah, it's available if people want
Right? We have been selling it, and he can sign it, and you can buy a signed copy. He's a great salesperson, too,
Yeah.
if you've noticed.
So this is a book signing for more than one book. Okay. Thank you so much, my dears. It's
Welcome.
always a pleasure to be in your
great to be
company.
here.
And Toby, do we take a pause, or do you want to actually record Michael getting up and sitting down again? All right. Here, I'll hold it. Let's bring it out these. Wow.
Now, look at that.
He is so...
No problem.
He can walk now without his cane.
And he is doing it. His will, his motivation is just astonishing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my dear.